Prayer for the Day was presented from Wales by George Craig. And now, on IPM, the chance to hear an aristocrat of the airwaves. Oh, and Eddie Mair too.
Good morning. Welcome to IPM, the programme that starts with its listeners. And this week, a listener with connections, not only to the Prime Minister of Greece, but also royalty. So please, sit up as I guide you in his direction. History is littered with more what-ifs than there are wrinkles on the face of Mark's Gran from The Only Way is Essex. What if there had been no Magna Carta?
Does Magna Carta mean nothing to you? Did she die in vain?
What if Guy Fawkes had succeeded in blowing up Parliament? What if Time Commanders had been as successful as Dragon's Den?
It's 6 o'clock on Wednesday, the 2nd of November. Good morning. This is Today with Eddie Mair and Evan Davis.
What if Friederike, Tyra, Marion, Wilhelmina, Dorothea von der Osten had become Queen? Yes, you heard me. What if Friederike, Tyra, Marion, Wilhelmina, Dorothea von der Osten had been crowned as our Queen? The rules that mean royal boys take precedence over their older sisters are being changed. Had they been changed during the reign of Queen Victoria, Friederike wouldn't be a German homeopath, she'd be our monarch. On PM this week, I asked her if she'd have been any good.
I would be a good queen, yes.
Rafe Heydel-Mankoo heard that interview and wanted to point out something that Friederike, Tyra, Marion, Wilhelmina, Dorothea von der Osten didn't mention. And when we asked him to come in and tell us what it was, well, it turns out he's got quite a story himself.
Due to the changes that were announced in Perth with regards to changing the succession so that females would take precedence over their younger brothers, it raised all sorts of possibilities as to who might be the rightful sovereign in those cases. And of course the question is, from whom would you trace? So it's always fun to pick someone popular like Queen Victoria, who had a daughter older than King Edward, who wouldn't have become King and Emperor of India, and she married Frederick III of Prussia, and their issue became Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, who, of course, was a rather instrumental figure in the First World War, so there was the possibility that the King of Britain could also have been the same chap who was head of Germany, which, of course, could have changed British and certainly Western history forever. But I just thought it was interesting that she chose not to mention that particular fact.
She did seem lovely, though, didn't she? I mean, she would have made a perfectly good queen, it seemed to me.
Yeah, she seemed to have fun. She seemed to have taken a great interest in the fact that she could have been queen too, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, wouldn't you?
Well, I always think the crown should go to the person who least wants the job.
Well, the thing about monarchies, though, is you never know who you're going to get, do you? That's the good and the bad thing about them, isn't it?
Well, that's the beauty of it. You know, it's the accident of birth, which I suppose you could say is the most democratic argument of all, because there's no control over it in that sense.
You've got some royal connections in your family, don't you? Tell me about those.
I've got some aristocratic and royal descents from Poland and Austria and Germany, but unfortunately an event called the Second World War happened, so I never got to experience any of the glory of living in a gilded cage, and my life was as humdrum as the next, unfortunately.
Well, you're the grandson of a baron and a Greek-born Polish princess. Not many people can say that.
Yes, but Polish and Austrian. In an area of Poland which is now the Ukraine, and has suffered quite a lot over the last century with the Soviets and the Germans essentially left in 1939 with nothing more than the shirts on their backs.
You've also got a link to the Papandreous.
Yes, indeed. George Papandreou, the poor embattled Prime Minister of Greece right now.
You're saying that as we speak. Who knows where we'll be?
Indeed, yes, we shall see. The Papandreou dynasty, probably greater than the Kennedys in terms of the Greek national mentality. His grandmother was the sister of my great-grandmother. The first George Papandreou was the first Prime Minister of Greece, put in there by Churchill. And an interesting dynasty, and we'll see whether the dynasty actually carries on for another generation. I mean, there are some interesting members of the family. We'll see what happens after the next couple of days.
Who stands out as being an interesting member of the Papandreou family, besides George, of course?
Well, his son has gotten a lot of interest, also called Andreas. His grandfather was George, and then there was Andreas, and then George and Andreas, rather like we had with Winston Churchill's son Randolph, followed by Winston, followed by Randolph, although the current Randolph Churchill has now named his son John, ending a 5-generation link.
You disapprove?
I do, as a traditionalist.
Thinking of tradition, and you talked a moment about how useful the monarchy can be. Why is the monarchy still useful to us, do you think?
I think really the crown epitomizes the equivalent of the soul of the man in philosophy. It is the life force of the state. So everything that we have in this country emanates from the crown. It is the source of all power. But it also upholds those fundamental pillars of civil society. It is the national focal point. Most countries in the world are born out of bloodshed and independence. We look at July the 4th in America and the Bastille Day in France. We don't have that. So the crown is actually the focal point for our national identity. We come together as a nation, uniting us as a people. Social cohesion comes into being through things like royal weddings and diamond jubilees. And through that, it gives us, I think, in an era of globalization when we seem to be somewhat unsure as to who we are anymore as a people, it provides us with that grounding element that we need. And additionally to that, I think it's the supreme example of civic duty. The monarchy exemplifies the big society and the concept of engaging in philanthropic activities, engaging in charitable endeavors. And also very much the notion of moral leadership through the examples of the Queen and her mother through self-sacrifice and dedication to duty. So those are things which I think the sovereign and the crown perform as head of the nation as opposed to just head of state. The head of state is the constitutional functions of opening parliament, signing bills, but as head of the nation, the Queen and the monarchy are actually the spiritual, the social heart of the nation. And those are two different roles, and I don't think any other form of government is able to actually play those two together.
And it's a form of government, presumably, you would recommend to anyone. Do you think the world would be a better place if every country had a king and queen?
Well, not necessarily every country, but I certainly think that there are many countries in the world that would benefit from it. You know, many people sort of seem to think that monarchies are somehow anachronistic and out of date. Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Nobody would regard those as being antiquated or behind the times. Neither are monarchies, inherently conservative. I mean, if you think Sweden or the Netherlands or Denmark are socially conservative, I think you're profoundly mistaken. But certainly in places such as the Middle East, for example, I think you would find that monarchies are more able to bring all factions underneath their umbrella. In Afghanistan, for example, King Zahir Shah, who was the king of Afghanistan for many years until he was deposed by fundamentalists, was still regarded as father of the nation all the way through till his death a couple of years ago. But unfortunately, the Americans, due to the unfortunate situation of their birth, I always say a bunch of Englishmen throwing off a German king, they have a natural opposition to monarchy, and Madeleine Albright famously, when speaking about the restoration of a monarchy in Serbia, said, "We don't do kings." And it's that, I think, rather brainwashed and unfortunately blinkered outlook which has blighted the future of many places in the Middle East which could have benefited from the salve of a monarchy.
What's the earliest memory you have of flag waving for the monarch, perhaps literally?
Flag waving for the monarch, I was 14 and I saw the Queen Mother swathed in blue chiffon.
What was she wearing?
The Queen Mother, not me. Thank you very much. beat me to that one. Thank you.
Sorry. As you were. Where are you? 14 years old. What's the event?
I'm 14 years old, and I'm in Canada. The Queen, of course, is Queen of Canada, as much as she is Queen of Australia and New Zealand. And there was a Canada Day celebration, and the Queen Mother was there, and she spoke, and I hadn't heard her speak before.
What was that like?
It was wonderful. There was an electricity. And when the Queen went to the United Nations General Assembly in 2010, he had all of these diplomats who were seasoned, experienced people who had seen so many heads of state, and they were like giddy school children, jostling with each other, shoving each other out of the way, getting their mobile phones out to take a picture of this frail, old, 80-odd-year lady. And why was that? Because she was the only transnational monarch in the world, head of state of 16 nations, head of a Commonwealth of 54 nations, and she's been queen for almost as long as the UN's been in existence. And no other person can do that. That's the power and the emotion of monarchy, I think. And I think that's an extremely important element in actually creating a cohesive society, because it is the visible, physical embodiment of the constitution of our continued history. And that's what I think is important about monarchy, is the Americans have a piece of paper, a constitution, which is under glass, and they have a flag. We have a living physical embodiment of our collective island stories, history, and that, I think, is fantastic.
Can you remember anything the Queen Mother said that day?
Hello, delighted to be here.
You're making this up. From there, how did your interest in monarchy develop?
I joined an organisation called the Monarchist League of Canada, and got onto a lecture circuit, and at the age of 19 made my first appearance debating a small R Republican member of Parliament for an hour, very sweaty and nervous, and managed to get through it by the skin of my teeth. And after that, I think I was hooked on the subject and convinced myself even more of the importance of battling the foes who want to do away with what I believe is the finest form of government.
What, from a monarchist point of view, do you think has been the lowest point in the UK in the last 20 or 25 years?
Obviously, 1992, the Annus Horribilis, and the events surrounding that were the nadir. And
did you have a real worry at that point?
I think we all did, and certainly the days immediately after the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, there was a general scary feeling, and whilst I didn't think it would ever become something like a revolution, you did have the sense of living through a moment which was akin to the baying crowds at the gates. My immediate thoughts went back to things like the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution.
What was the last big royal event you were personally at?
Well, I covered the royal wedding for Canadian and American media, and that was tremendous to see too. And we heard at the Golden Jubilee that this was going to be a damp squib, nobody will come out, no one cares, this is going to be terribly embarrassing for the royal family. And crowds came out in their vast numbers. And again we saw it at the royal wedding, and I just remember having this great smile on my face and thinking, you know, this country is actually a proud, patriotic country. We wear our patriotism lightly, but I just remember thinking what a great set piece this is going to be and what a great build-up for next year in the Diamond Jubilee.
One final thought to finish at sort of where we started with old Friederike. If history had been different in a very big way, she might have been queen. If history had been different in an even bigger way, what kind of king would you be?
Well, actually, I'd have a damn good party to start with. No, I think I would hopefully lead a life similar to that of our current queen, essentially, which is to keep my mouth shut. I think that is the key role for any monarch, and carry on, essentially, hopefully leading by example.
Listener Rafe Heydel-Mankoo. Every week our listeners send us single sentences of news about their lives, and we compile them into our Your News bulletin. This week, Your News is read by the closest Radio 4 has to royalty, Edward Stern.